In the early morning hours of June 1982, an Air Force technician sat stationed inside a high-security monitoring vault at Buckley Air Force Base in Colorado. His eyes were fixed on the data feeds from the Defense Support Program satellites of the United States. Primary infrared eyes in space. These satellites were designed for one specific purpose: to detect the massive heat signature of the Soviet intercontinental ballistic missile launch. Suddenly, the silent monitors erupted. A massive infrared bloom appeared on the screen. Originating from a remote sector in the Tumen region of western Siberia, the thermal sensors indicated a heat spike so intense it bypassed the standard alert thresholds. The technician immediately contacted the North American Aerospace Defense Command. The initial data suggested a massive atmospheric explosion. Within minutes, the report reached the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon. Generals and intelligence analysts gathered around terminal screens, attempting to categorize the event. The scale of the infrared flash was equivalent to a 3-kiloton nuclear detonation. However, as the minutes ticked by, the expected secondary confirmations failed to arrive. The specialized Vela satellites, designed to detect the double flash characteristic of a nuclear explosion, remained silent. There was no seismic shock wave consistent with a nuclear strike, and no radiation plumes were detected by high-altitude sampling planes. The Pentagon was paralyzed. By a paradox, a nuclear-scale explosion had occurred in the heart of the Soviet Union, yet no weapon had been fired. To understand what the Pentagon was witnessing, we must look back to a classified briefing that had occurred months earlier inside the Oval Office. Gus W. Weiss, a technical expert on the National Security Council, had presented President Ronald Reagan with a document that would later be known as the Farewell Dossier. The dossier was provided by Vladimir Vetrov, a high-ranking KGB officer who had grown disillusioned with the Soviet system. Vetrov served within Directorate, a specialized branch of the KGB dedicated solely to scientific and technical espionage. Vetrov revealed that the Soviet Union was not just occasionally stealing Western secrets. They had built their entire industrial infrastructure on them. The Soviets had a shopping list. Every year, the State Military Industrial Commission identified thousands of technological targets in the United States, Japan, and West Germany. They were stealing the blueprints for the F-15 fighter jet, the docking mechanisms for NASA's space shuttle, and the precision timing software for automated oil pipelines. Vetrov's data proved that the Soviet Union had become a parasitic technological power. They were no longer innovating. They were simply waiting for the West to invent something, and then they would take it. This revelation created a divide in the Reagan administration. The FBI and the Department of Commerce wanted to immediately arrest every Soviet operative and shut down the trade routes. But Gus Weiss proposed a far more dangerous alternative. Weiss argued that if the U.S. simply stopped the theft, the Soviets would find new ways to steal. Instead, he suggested that the CIA should help the Soviets fulfill their shopping list. The plan was called the Trojan Horse Operation. The CIA began working with American software companies and industrial manufacturers to create poison technology. They took the exact blueprints and software codes the Soviets were trying to steal and modified them. They didn't make the software fail immediately, that would be too obvious. Instead, they engineered logic bombs. A logic bomb is a string of malicious code that remains dormant for months, performing perfectly during initial tests. It is designed to trigger only when a very specific set of conditions is met. The primary target was the Trans-Siberian Pipeline. The Soviets were desperate for automated control systems to manage the massive pressures required to move natural gas across thousands of miles of frozen tundra. They didn't have the computer power to build the control software themselves, so they attempted to purchase and eventually steal the software from a Canadian firm. The CIA intercepted the software before it reached the Soviet agents. Under the supervision of intelligence engineers, the code was rewritten. The new, corrupted version contained a flaw in the pressure regulation subroutine. The Soviets stole the software, believing they had secured the crown jewel of Western automation. They installed it across the entire Siberian network. They tested it for months, and it worked flawlessly. They were so confident in the stolen code that they accelerated the pipeline's operation. to meet their 1982 energy quotas. In June 1982, the conditions for the logic bomb were finally met. The software triggered a malfunction in the pipeline's control valves. First, it reset the pump speeds to a level far exceeding the safety specifications of the pipe's joints. Then, it abruptly closed the valves at the receiving end of the line. This created a hammer effect of immense pressure. The natural gas, compressed to extreme levels, tore through the steel casing of the pipeline. The friction of the tearing metal ignited the escaping gas. The resulting explosion was so immense that it obliterated the surrounding forest for kilometers. It was the largest non-nuclear explosion and fire ever recorded from space. Back in Moscow, the KGB and the Soviet leadership were in a state of absolute shock. They could not blame the United States, because doing so would mean admitting that they had stolen the software in the first place. They were forced to remain silent. While their energy infrastructure burned, the aftermath of the Siberian explosion was more devastating than the fire itself. The farewell dossier had effectively ended the Soviet Union's ability to trust its own technology. The KGB realized that if the pipeline software was a Trojan horse, then every other piece of stolen technology, the microchips in their missiles, the software in their radars, the designs of their aircraft could also be compromised. They had to stop their assembly lines. Thousands of engineers were pulled from production to manually inspect millions of lines of code and every physical circuit board they had acquired from the West. This created a massive bottleneck in the Soviet economy. Their industrial growth ground to a halt, while the United States continued to accelerate with the digital revolution of the 1980s. The Soviet Union was forced to look backward, paralyzed by the fear that their own machines were waiting to kill them. Vladimir Vetrov, the man who provided the dossier, was eventually caught by the KGB. During a routine investigation of an unrelated crime, they discovered his espionage activities. He was executed in the Lubyanka prison in 1985. However, his legacy was already complete. The logic bomb had proven that in the modern age, a single line of code could be more effective than a division of tanks. The Soviet Union never recovered from the technological paranoia, and the Siberian explosion remains the first major cyber warfare victory in history, achieved before the internet as we know it even existed.